The garden was flawless. Sculpted hedges, humming fountains, sunlight spilling across a table set with china and crystal. Rachel folded her hands in her lap, the linen napkin already creased from how tightly she was clutching it. Across from her, Brian's parents sipped tea like they were posing for a portrait. Marianne Whitmore, regal in pearls and powder pink, smiled with the cool detachment of a woman who never raised her voice but always got her way. Edward, in a monogrammed shirt and watch that probably cost more than Rachel's yearly salary, leaned back and cleared his throat. "We're so thrilled about the wedding," Marianne began, slicing a scone delicately. "It's going to be a lovely day. Private, tasteful, just the way Whitmores do it." Rachel nodded, grateful for the tea in her hands to occupy her nerves. "I'm really looking forward to it. Everything's coming together." Edward reached under the table and pulled out a navy blue folder, thick, pressed and official. He placed it between the dessert spoons and the salt shaker. "Speaking of preparation," he said, "we'd like you to look this over. Just a formality, of course." Rachel blinked. Her fingers froze around the porcelain cup. "What's this?" "A prenup," Marianne said, smiling sweetly. "We do it with everyone in the family. It protects all parties involved. You understand?" Rachel's eyes flicked to Brian. He was buttering a biscuit, slowly, too slowly. His shoulders were tense. "You never mentioned this," Rachel said quietly. Brian cleared his throat. I meant to. I just thought it would come up later. It's really not a big deal." "Not a big deal." A legal contract slid across the table, while her name was still written in frosting on the sample wedding cake upstairs. Rachel pressed her lips together. The folder sat there like a silent accusation. She forced a smile, though her cheeks felt stiff. "Of course, I'll take a look." The lunch ended quickly after that. Marianne moved on to discussing floral arrangements. Edward checked his phone. Brian still wouldn't meet her eyes. Rachel walked to her car with the folder clutched like it might burn her. She got in, shut the door, and sat there, motionless for a while. The air was warm, but she didn't turn the engine on. Tears slid down before she could stop them. Not loud, not messy, just quiet, steady grief. She rested her forehead on the steering wheel and whispered, "I thought I was marrying into a family. Turns out I was signing into a contract." Rachel Carter's classroom was a patchwork of second-hand posters, hand-painted motivational quotes, and desks worn from years of anxious scribbling. Her mornings began with lesson plans and lukewarm coffee, and her evenings ended with correcting papers by the flickering light of a thrifted lamp. She taught 8th grade English at Roosevelt Middle School. Not glamorous, but it was honest, and she loved her students like they were her own. She'd grown up with nothing handed to her. Her mother, Linda, had worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. There had been no family savings, no vacations, and certainly no financial cushion when Linda was diagnosed with breast cancer Rachel's sophomore year of college. Rachel buried herself in work, buried herself in responsibility. Every dollar she spent still had to be justified. Every decision carried weight. And through it all, she learned one thing. Sincerity mattered. People mattered. Not title, not bank accounts. Which is why Brian had seemed different, kind, thoughtful, a breath of fresh air in her otherwise practical world. He noticed the things no one else did, the callus on her writing hand, the way she clutched her pendant when she was nervous, how she preferred voice notes over texts because she liked hearing tone. They'd met at a charity gala she almost didn't attend. He was representing his family's foundation. She was there on a teacher's scholarship. Their chemistry had been instant. He asked her questions, real ones, and seemed genuinely intrigued when she talked about curriculum gaps and underfunded libraries. 2 years later, he proposed in a vineyard in Napa, all fairy lights and violinists. It was surreal, intoxicating, and against every rule she'd made for herself. "I said I'd never marry into money," she'd whispered that night. Brian had kissed her fingers and replied, "Then don't. Marry me, not the money." But now, as she stared at the prenup on her dining table, that promise felt hollow, the kind of hollow that echoed. The next morning, she met Janelle, her closest friend since college, at their regular coffee spot. The moment Rachel slid the folder across the table, Janelle's eyebrows arched. "Girl, you need to be careful," Rachel sighed, wrapping her hands around her cup. "He says it's just family tradition." "No," Janelle said firmly. "It's control. It's a red flag, Rach, especially since he waited this long to mention it." Rachel looked out the window, guilt gnawing at her. I don't want to start our marriage with a fight. Then don't, Janelle said, leaning forward. Start it with clarity. Later that night, Rachel tried to bring it up again. Brian was stretched on their couch, half watching a documentary. Brian, why didn't you tell me about the prenup earlier? He muted the TV but didn't look at her. I knew how it'd make you feel. That's why I didn't bring it up until my parents pushed it. That's not fair. It's not personal, Rachel. It's just protocol. She stared at him. He wasn't cold, not exactly, but he was distant in the way that people are when they've already made peace with something you're still choking on. The next morning, she signed it. Her hand didn't tremble. Her signature was neat. She slid the folder back into its envelope, drove to the Whitmore estate, and dropped it off with Marianne's assistant. She didn't cry this time, but something inside her folded inward, a part of her that used to believe. The pasta sauce simmered quietly as Rachel stirred, her other hand resting lightly on the envelope in her pocket, the one she hadn't let go of since leaving the attorney's office. Brian was talking about wedding colours, about how his mother thought sage green was too earthy for a winter wedding. Rachel barely heard him. Her mind was full of numbers, legal terms, and the sound of Mr. Feldman's voice. You are the sole heir to a $22.4 million estate. She hadn't told Brian right away. Something in her gut told her to wait, not out of deceit, but self-preservation. The news was too heavy, too life-altering to toss casually into a dinner conversation. For 48 hours, she lived with the secret. It changed the way she looked at everything. The prenup, the way Marianne smiled with her lips, but not her eyes. The emails Brian never let her see. She tried to go on with normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore. So that night, as the sauce bubbled and Brian set out plates, she said it quietly. I need to tell you something. Brian paused, a dish towel over his shoulder. What's up? She turned off the stove and faced him. My aunt passed away. Elaine. He blinked. The one who disowned your mum? Rachel nodded. Yeah. We hadn't talked in years, but I went to the funeral, and afterward, her lawyer said she left everything to me. Brian tilted his head, curious. Everything like everything, Rachel said, almost in a whisper. Oil royalties, land, some private partnerships. They had it all tied up in trusts and shares. $22 million. It's mine. Silence. Then the spoon dropped. His reaction was exactly what she feared. Too much. Too fast. Brian stepped forward and kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her hand. Oh my God, babe. That's incredible. I mean, wow. You deserve this. She nodded slowly, but her spine stiffened. Something about the way his hands lingered on her hips felt rehearsed. That night, he poured champagne, called her my golden girl, insisted they book a honeymoon villa in Italy. He joked about retiring early, about naming a yacht after her, and Rachel smiled through all of it. But inside, something twisted. He'd never talked like this before. He'd never touched her like this before. Not with awe, but possession. 3 days later, Marianne's lawyer called. Rachel picked up, assuming it was about the venue deposit. Hi, Ms. Carter, the lawyer said smoothly. Just a quick note. Mrs. Whitmore would like to schedule a time to go over some updates to the prenup. Minor adjustments, of course. Nothing alarming. Rachel's mouth went dry. Updates. Yes, a few clauses. Post-inheritance clauses mostly. Standard procedure. You understand? Rachel said nothing. Would next Thursday work for you? He asked. Rachel hung up without answering. Her heart pounded. There it was. The truth beneath the etiquette. The masks slipping. The moment she became an asset, the terms changed. She walked to the kitchen, opened the original prenup still sitting in her drawer, and for the first time truly read it, line by line. Then she poured herself a glass of water and stared out the window, numb. It wasn't just about protecting their son anymore. Now it was about owning her. The tone of Marianne's texts shifted almost overnight. Where once there had been passive-aggressive critiques about wedding dresses and table linen, there was now a flurry of interest cloaked in faux warmth. Marianne, darling, have you considered placing part of the inheritance in a managed trust? I can connect you with our financial planner. He's excellent with high net worth portfolios. Marianne, also, Edward thinks you'd be a wonderful addition to the Whitmore Women's Foundation. We have quarterly retreats. All very empowering. Marianne, so proud of you. You're becoming one of us. Rachel read each message with a tightening jaw. Every emoji felt like a veiled knife. They were trying to reframe her windfall as a gift from them, as if they'd opened the gates of wealth and ushered her in. Then came the call from Edward. "Rachel," he said smoothly, "now that you're coming into some significant capital, we should talk about leveraging your influence. There's a seat available on the foundation board. It's symbolic, of course, but it helps with optics. Optics matter, especially for women in our circle." Rachel nearly laughed. Just 2 months ago, they were debating whether she should sign a prenup before even being introduced to extended family. Now they wanted her face on press releases. But the most insidious change came from Brian. Gone was the warm, slightly goofy man she fell in love with. In his place was someone who said all the right things, but looked at her like he was waiting for her next move. "You're pulling away," he said one night, after she sat silently during dinner. "I'm thinking," she replied. He reached for her hand across the table. "Rachel, please don't punish me for my parents. I know they can be intense, but I'm not them. You know that." She didn't answer right away, because the truth was, she didn't know anymore. She remembered the way he looked away when the original prenup came up, the way he let his parents blindside her, and now, how quickly he adapted to her wealth, like it was always part of his future. That week, she went to visit Mr. Colson, a retired civics teacher from her school who used to be a lawyer. He lived alone with a wall of old law books and a sharp memory. She brought both prenup. Colson scanned them in silence, occasionally muttering under his breath. Then he leaned back and folded his arms. "They're trying to trap you," he said flatly. Rachel frowned. "How?" "This revised prenup. It's functionally a post-nup. They're repositioning the clauses to protect your new assets, but only under the guise of marital support. If you sign this, and you divorce later, they can argue you agreed to shield their son from your wealth. You'd walk away with nothing." Rachel felt cold. "But I haven't even signed the second one yet." "Don't." He pointed to a highlighted section. Clause 14.5. This one's a landmine. It waives your right to contest marital asset division, even if fraud is discovered later. The paper felt heavier in her hands now, sharp around the edges. From that day on, she started working with Colson in secret. He helped her draft questions, explained legal loopholes, and taught her how to document conversations. She began keeping every text, every email, every offhand comment from Brian's family. She didn't tell Brian. Instead, she watched, quietly, carefully. A week before the wedding, Rachel stood in their living room holding a mug of tea, her hands steady, her voice calm. "If I had told you about the inheritance before signing the prenup," she asked Brian, "would your parents still have insisted on it?" Brian was unprepared. He blinked. "What kind of question is that?" "Just answer it." He scratched the back of his neck, avoiding her eyes. "Rachel, look, it's complicated. They were just protecting me. That's all." "So, that's a yes." He tried to smile, like they were in a normal argument. "We're in love. That's what matters. You're turning this into something it's not." She didn't smile back. That night, after Brian fell asleep, she sat at his laptop in the dim glow of the kitchen. His passwords hadn't changed. She hesitated for only a moment, then clicked into his email. A folder titled Pre-Wedding Strategy caught her attention. Inside were months of correspondence between him and Marianne. Subject lines like damage control timeline, getting her comfortable, post-signing behavior. Guidelines. One thread had an attachment labeled Reputation Risk Notes, Rachel Carter. Her hands trembled as she opened it. In it, Marianne had written, "She's sweet, but naive. Once the marriage settles, she'll adapt. If not, we can explore legal pivot options, as long as we have the revised document signed first." At the end of the thread, Brian had replied, "Understood. I'll make sure it gets done before the wedding. Don't worry." Rachel's stomach turned. She closed the laptop gently, walked into the bathroom. Thoughts. The morning sun poured like gold across the Whitmore estate, casting long shadows over white floral arches and crystal chairs set for 200. Staff bustled quietly. Champagne bottles clinked in ice buckets. A string quartet rehearsed in the garden. It was, by all appearances, a perfect wedding day. Rachel arrived in silence. Her dress was simple, elegant satin, not the one Marianne had insisted on. Her veil floated behind her like a whisper. Beside her walked Mr. Colson, calm in a dark grey suit, a leather folder in one hand, a discreet voice recorder in the other. They stepped through the grand front doors like they belonged there. In the parlour, Brian was adjusting his cufflinks when he saw her. Relief washed over his face. "You're early," he said. crossing toward her. You look beautiful. Rachel didn't smile. Where are your parents? Brian hesitated. In the sunroom. Why? Good. She walked past him without waiting, heels tapping sharply against the marble floor. Brian followed, confused but sensing something was wrong. Inside the sunroom, Edward and Marianne stood with champagne flutes, laughing with a pair of well-dressed guests. They turned as Rachel entered, surprised to see the bride before the ceremony. Rachel, Marianne began, stepping forward. I'm not here to marry your son, Rachel said, voice clear, steady. I'm here to expose you. Marianne froze. Edward's glass paused mid-air. Brian stepped in behind Rachel, face pale. Excuse me? Marianne whispered. Mr. Coulson stepped forward and placed the recorder on the table. He pressed play. From the small speaker came Marianne's own voice. She's sweet but naive. Once the marriage settles, she'll adapt. If not, we can explore legal pivot options, as long as we have the revised documents signed first. The room went still. Rachel opened the leather folder and pulled out printed emails, dates, timestamps, signatures. All your strategies, all your planning, all your manipulation, documented. Brian's hands went to his head. Rachel, wait, this isn't… She turned to him, eyes sharp. You were in on it. Every step. I didn't want to hurt you, he shouted. I just didn't know what else to do. You could have loved me for real, Rachel said quietly, but you chose comfort over courage. Marianne found her voice. You recorded us? That's illegal. No, Mr. Coulson said calmly. Texas is a one-party consent state. She had every right. And your emails, they're all traceable, all admissible. Edward threw his glass at the fireplace. You're going to regret this. We'll bury you in court. Rachel looked at him, not with fear, but with the unshakable calm of someone who has nothing left to lose. You've been burying women for years. I'm just the first one to dig my way out. She turned to go. Brian grabbed her wrist. Rachel, please, we can fix this. She stared at his hand until he let go. We're past fixing. Rachel walked out, past the white orchids, the violinists, the awaiting guests. No tears, no breakdown, just quiet, clean strength. By evening, the story had already begun to spread. An anonymous tip reached a business ethics blog, then a legal watchdog group. By morning, the Whitmore name was trending, not for their empire, but for their downfall. Whispers grew louder. A former fiancé from New York came forward, then another from Connecticut. Similar tactics, similar prenups, similar betrayals. What had once been a legacy was now a scandal. And at the center of it, the woman in the satin dress who walked away before saying, I do. 6 months later, Rachel Carter stood in front of a modest community center in Houston's 3rd Ward. Behind her, a handmade sign read, The Clarity Project, Legal Literacy for Women. Inside, a group of young women sat in folding chairs, holding printed guides titled Know Your Rights, Prenups, Property and Power. They listened as a volunteer attorney walked them through real-life examples. No jargon, no intimidation, just facts. Rachel wasn't interested in attention. She didn't do interviews, ignored the media requests, and turned down 2 book deals. The headlines had all moved on anyway, to fresher scandals, flashier names. She lived in a quiet bungalow now, paid in full. No maids, no gated community, no marble counters. Just peace, the kind you fight for, not the kind someone hands you with strings attached. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a short, handwritten note. You don't know me, but I was once engaged to Brian too. I got out before the wedding, but I always thought I was crazy, paranoid, ungrateful. Watching you walk away reminded me that I wasn't. Thank you for being brave. Rachel folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her journal, where she kept pieces of her before and after. She never answered it. Some things don't need a reply. In the courtroom downtown, the Whitmores were no longer gods. Rachel's testimony had helped validate the claims of several other women. They described eerily similar patterns: sudden prenups, pressure, manipulation masked as protocol. Her story gave their voices weight. Brian showed up in court alone. No family, no fiancé, no fanfare. Just him, looking 10 years older and far too tired. He tried to make eye contact with Rachel once, a quick, silent plea, but she didn't acknowledge it. She had said everything that needed saying in the sunroom. The Whitmore real estate empire was under review, tied up in internal audits and investor lawsuit. Edward and Marianne had stepped away from public roles, the press releases said, but really, they'd vanished. Their name, once synonymous with elite success, was now whispered with suspicion. Rachel never celebrated it. She didn't toast, didn't gloat. Revenge had never been the goal. Accountability was. And maybe healing. Every week, women walked through the doors of the Clarity Project, some trembling, some angry, some just confused. And every week, Rachel stood at the front of the room, calm and steady, and told them, knowledge isn't just power, it's protection. She smiled more now, but not because life got easier. She smiled because she'd earned every bit of it. The folding chairs were a little squeaky, the coffee lukewarm, and the projector flickered now and then. But the room was full. Women of all ages sat with notebooks in their laps and quiet determination in their eyes. Rachel leaned against the podium in jeans and a simple navy sweater, sipping her coffee between questions. The seminar had gone well. Another small victory. Another group of women leaving just a little more prepared than when they walked in. A girl in the back, maybe 22, nervous hands but sharp eyes, raised her hand slowly. "Can I ask you something personal?" Rachel nodded. "Of course." The girl hesitated. "Aren't you afraid they'll come after you? I mean, they had so much power." The room stilled. Every face turned toward Rachel, waiting. Rachel took one slow breath, then smiled. Not bitter, not smug, just free. "When you stop needing their approval," she said gently, "they lose all their power." There was a pause. Then, the sound of hands clapping, slowly at first, then rising. It wasn't thunderous. It didn't need to be. It was enough. Rachel glanced out the window. Sunlight spilled across the pavement like a quiet invitation. She gathered her things, waved to the group, and stepped outside. No cameras, no headlines, no whispers, just wind in her hair and warmth on her skin. Some families inherit wealth. I inherited wisdom, and that's worth more than 22 million. She walked down the steps without looking back. The light followed her, fade to black. Hi besties, thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.